binders.
Right.
Everything's just been thrown around us.
Right.
So, exactly what do you do here, like the government committee? I'm just curious.
It's a great question. I can give you my answer. Kristen may have a different. We're basically looking at the charter, like part of the original charter commission directive was that every 5 years, ostensibly, there's supposed to be a group like this that goes back and looks at the charter and to see if it's still serving the purpose for which it was intended, or if there are better ways in which to be organizing town government. So thus far, we've been taking a lot of testimonies, so to speak, from different folks, and there'll be some here today, like David Worth and others who, really are providing input from their perspective in their role as they serve the town. Libby Gibson is here, Andrew Gorse, a prior town manager. So that's sort of how I. Yeah.
So then you tell the board of selectmen.
Yeah, probably in the next, I don't know what it would be, but I would use 6 months as a placeholder. We might begin to form an opinion as a body about what we've heard, and then maybe make some initial recommendations. Then the board can maybe decide on is that something that they want to put forward for the next town meeting for consideration. Yeah.
Pretty good timing.
That was
I'm here, and where is everybody? The hardcore brigade. Good work.
I think last meeting was like our quorum, all this
Right.
meeting, like everybody.
Right. Boy, now Penny's gone.
Yeah, if she's serving through the end of the term, she has to Wednesday.
Right, but I think she
I think her mentally framework says,
Right.
I've been out of here for a while.
I think she said, this is my last name.
Yeah. When my daughter's trying to close a loan, geez. I'm sort of an informal observer advisor, so I'm trying to keep up with what's going on. So pardon me if my mind wanders.
Now, that is an important.
Yeah, no, it is important. Richard.
One disaster after another. I love it. Dead car in A&P in Stop and Shop parking lot.
Your car?
My wife's car.
Oh, that's even worse.
Right?
Tell me about it.
Yeah, because you gotta fix it.
Yeah? Chock full of groceries.
Oh, jeez, that's awful.
Well, fortunately, my daughter's here. She can
I
go
was just
pick her
gonna
up.
say, Hillary came in last night.
In one of your special
I was just gonna
cars.
say, Hillary came in last night, so that's good.
Yeah, she did.
Is that good or not good?
Oh, yes. They're here for the summer.
They're here for the whole summer again?
Oh, yeah.
that's
One more
awesome.
time.
Well, that'll be fine. I know my dad will enjoy having Emily over.
Oh, good.
Just send them over for,
Right.
I'll send them all over with a roll of duct tape. How do you know Hillary?
My dad, Walter and Diane Flaherty. Megan is my sister.
Duh. That explains that, doesn't it?
Next door neighbors.
everybody needs a tag, right?
Yeah.
Everybody knows Walter and Diane, I mean, come on.
Well, now I'm a Ferentella, so then I get the Ferentella.
Oh, right.
I'm throwing the fan teller. Oh, okay. I just put two and two together and it added up. Doesn't usually do that.
Merger.
Other than that, we're fine.
So do we have to throw in a new
I
secretary?
don't know, they were there, and nobody was here when it came in.
Sure.
So I don't know, it's probably nice.
Well, if you came as
We need a new secretary.
Talk about.
Don't look at me.
Since Penny is gone.
Logins,
Yeah.
you're going both ways.
Was there,
Well,
And, you
are
come.
we still waiting for one more position?
out and,
Yeah, I think the
all of a
board,
sudden you get
maybe this Wednesday is gonna consider additional applications.
our appointment?
Yeah,
Yeah. What I
Maybe we
did
should
was
wait for
you
that.
can have a smart,
Right,
so I went
yeah.
around.
Hopefully they can do it.
Back to the notary.
I suspect he's sitting right there.
there we go.
Don't want to be the only one.
Where's our esteemed chairman?
Yeah, Linda is.
Yeah, but she doesn't come out.
No. True.
Don't we have like 3 visitors today?
Is what?
I thought we had like, is this the right thing?
Yeah.
Here's one, we got one. And I think
We
had
should
2
have the
others.
chair of the
And
board and
Jason.
David Worth.
Yeah, we had David and Jason.
Yeah. And
They're all stuck in traffic.
Yeah, traffic was horrible.
Well, we could ask them about traffic. We want a traffic enforcement czar. Right, Richard? Isn't that what we
You know what
discussed?
we really want? We want to ban mopeds, just like the Vineyard's doing. And we want to limit rental cars. We're all touting public transportation, which is a great thing.
And parking meters,
I
Oh, we're
I had a
gonna get
citizen
parking
approach me
meters,
saying
yeah,
that they
geez.
want
keep the
a
realtors
citizen's
off Main
article that by
Street.
2050, all cars on Nantucket have to be electric. And
Speaking of electric
Until the
bikes,
downtown merchants
I-
need
how,
to keep
how
their
is
employees
the town
on.
gonna regulate
I don't
bikes on the bike
freaking
path?
nickel on anything.
Because some of them go really
Put
fast.
meters in.
We have not
Some
seen,
going up to 30.
electric bikes.
we have not seen the electric bikes yet, but the Vineyard's dealing with it right now.
well, they started this
Well,
summer.
but
I've
like-
seen quite a few this summer.
I mean, it's great that we have them so we have assist to pedal, but at some point, it's like, is it supposed to be on the road or on
Right.
the
The,
bike path?
the way the Vineyard's looking at it, the assist to pedal, the pedal to assist bikes are bikes. And they deserve to be on the bike path or whatever. They'll do a maximum of 18 miles an hour.
Oh, that's
Well,
good.
that's.
The electric bikes will do as much as 26. And they are they are in the process of prohibiting them from bike paths,
Mm. But then.
which
does
is gonna
that-
put them right in the middle of the
I was gonna
road.
say, does that mean they can go on the?
And so they're gonna start looking at banning mopeds, they're gonna start looking at banning electric bicycles. And, I don't mean to be mean and cruel about that, but when you look at our traffic situation, rotaries are not going to help the number of vehicles on this island. And that's what we need to cut down, is the number of vehicles. It's that simple.
Is this a secret recording device? Don't you think this is Big Brother looking
Yes.
at you?
Here, I'll lick it and we'll sort it out. Jeez. But yeah, I've been following the Vineyard and what they're doing, and it's very interesting,
Yeah.
Particularly with the mopeds.
He's stuck in traffic in town,
Yeah,
coming
okay,
out.
Lee.
And I
Okay,
just had
Lee.
to run home to Surfside to close the windows and the doors.
It's not raining.
Yes, it was.
No, well, it's not raining now.
Yes, it is.
In Surfside.
Maybe over your house.
We have our own weather system out there.
I think your house does.
So, John, we just talked, he's stuck in traffic trying to get out of town.
You'll get it. You'll get it.
Now, isn't Jason supposed to be coming?
Indeed.
Maybe he's
Jason
stuck
and
in
David
town
Worth.
also.
I'm sure David Worth, well, traffic from that, well, he doesn't come from Matty, but he comes from Surfside.
Oh,
Hmm?
that's hard to get in. I was over on Skyline and Suzanne Dobbs.
I got here in a heartbeat.
I had to go all the way out, all the way out, all the way out, nobody here, all the way back down Surfside and still got stuck. They're paving the boulevard.
I had a wonderful trip.
You need a motorcycle like this.
I had motorcycles.
I've got one of those.
I had
too.
2 of those, and I was, figured I was the single parent of 3 kids. I needed to survive,
Oh, what
so I
is
sold them.
this?
for electric cars. I think that's a great proposal.
What is it?
I said I had a citizen say they want,
A flyover?
no, that by 2050 all cars would have to be electric on Nantucket. I think that would be a good way.
No, because you still have to go off island. And I'm not doing an electric car off island. I have friends who have one in Arizona and they have a house in Wisconsin. They have to stop so many times, it's ridiculous.
So we feel
Like I said,
recharge.
it's not worth it coming across country. It's okay here, but if you have to go off
Yeah, but
island,
by
forget
2050,
it.
don't you think they'll have better batteries?
I'm being buried in my car.
Long range.
And it better not be one of the batteries that keep exploding. Eve and I got all the way to Surfside and back.
That was my fatal flaw. Yeah. I closed Gardner and I was all thrown off and it was just.
Are they doing something on Gardner now?
Yes,
What are they doing on Gardner?
utilities,
Making things inconvenient.
that's what the sign said.
Oh. Apologies.
Of course, it's the 4th of July week. They wanted to do that.
All right.
Remember another.
Of course. Would anybody else like a copy of the agenda?
Is he coming? Jason?
Jason is coming. Jason's going to be late. David Worth said that he was coming as well.
They're probably all stuck somewhere.
Probably all stuck somewhere. All right. Well, why don't we begin then? Chrissy, would you mind doing minutes again? Thank you. Okay. Let's have a call to order. This is the Monday, June 25th, 2018 Town Government Study Committee meeting. Appears to be 1:39,
And we're all here.
and we're all here.
Yay.
Good for us. Can we have an approval of the agenda as written
With a correction?
with correction?
Yes, I'm not noted on present.
On the minutes?
We're just doing the
Oh,
agenda.
I'm sorry, I got ahead of
Motion to
myself.
approve the agenda.
I got ahead
So
of
moved. Is
myself.
there a second to approve the agenda? Second. All those in favor? Aye. Terrific. The minutes.
Now I won't
I hear there might be something with the minutes then.
If somebody would please place my name as present for that particular meeting,
Absolutely.
thank you.
That makes sense. Any other comments on the minutes? If not, maybe,
Make a motion to approve with that change.
thank you. Is there a second?
Second?
Motion made and second. All those in favor? Aye. Terrific. So approved with the change to include Mr. Ray. Public comment. Ms. Emery, I believe.
Is she here as public comment or?
Well,
town
that's a good
official?
question. Are-
She's town official.
You want to do this as town official
She's
or as
Parks and Rec.
public?
Whatever you
Yeah,
want.
that's not public comment.
All right, let's put her, let's have you go under.
Curtis would be public comment if he had a comment.
You got a
Never
comment?
comment about anything that I wasn't asked.
Not right now then.
Fine then.
All right, then let's move on to the town official. And Cheryl, now you're up.
You want me to sit here?
Come on over here.
Come on over here.
Come up the end.
Take the head of the table.
Okay, so I'm Cheryl Emery on Park and Rec Commission, and I want to talk about our Park and Rec Department. Does anybody know where that Park and Rec Department is?
It disappeared.
It
It was
disappeared
defunded and disappeared.
in 2012 or 11 or 12.
Absorbed under DPW now?
It's in
Sort of, but not.
DPW, it's in the police department in licensing, it's at the cultural and tourism department, it's in the community school for sports programming,
Which it shouldn't be.
and Park and Rec Commission. And there's not a lot of conversation between everybody, you know. Our parks have deteriorated because of it. When you look at Tom Nevers, for instance. Here we have a 22-acre park that could be like fantastic, or, premier park. We get a lot of attention and maintenance and upkeep and programming at Children's Beach because it's more geared to our tourist community. But for the locals, everybody that lives here, and our summer residents, there's not much happening at Tom Nevers. Here's a little, and it's this.
Do you remember when Parks and Rec, I was involved with it getting started. Do you remember how long, was that 1996 somewhere? Parks and Rec was established?
No, it was back in the 60s, wasn't it?
Well, not when we ended up with Ellsworth. Megan Ellsworth was the first director. And we had our office down at the Jetties Beach tennis courts, because I was involved with that. And I can't remember how long ago that was. And we had a full-fledged department doing the bathrooms, the fields, the scheduling, the whole 9 yards.
So just to give you an idea, like, you know, here's some photos, like how well maintained our parks are. I mean, this park, and this is, doesn't,
Yeah, let me see.
we have a lot of artwork in our park. You know,
Well, Cheryl, not to mention that Parks and Rec used to have control of the bathrooms and the septics in the bathrooms, and when it was converted over, the DPW under the former director did not know she had to clean out the septic at Dionis Beach bathhouse, and it overflowed into the parking lot, and people were walking through it thinking it was just muddy sand. Now, that's the kind of stuff that goes on because they didn't have jurisdiction, they didn't have their own people fixing the bathhouses, fixing the deltas, managing the deltas, re-fertilizing the deltas, they completely messed up the turf field. We need it back. It's in the charter. Long and the short of it, it's in the charter.
well, this is going back to the charter. The original charter for Park and Rec says something that they're only responsible for Children's Beach, Jetties Beach, and cleaning Matticat Beach. So that's, I mean, that's so archaic, you know?
Yeah,
We need to
that's not
bring it
what
up
they
to,
did.
we need to have a,
So when you say in the charter, what charter are you referring to, just to be clear?
Ours.
Park and Recreation, oh, sorry, that might be more on the Park and Recreation Commission.
No, it's actually in the charter,
It's in the
The
charter.
town charter.
town charter. There's a
Yeah.
whole little
The town
blurb
charter.
about the Parks and Rec department,
And the
and it was under the state as
responsibilities.
well. There's a whole bunch of other stuff involved in how we got where we were back when Megan Ellsworth was the Parks and Rec director, and what they had jurisdiction over. And that was in the charter as to who they reported to. That's where it got a little screwy, because the charter says one thing, but it also says something else. And that's where it got into trouble, where they thought they could eliminate the staffing, not fund it, but they had to by law, keep the Parks and Rec Commission. That's where the problem occurred. So they defunded it, took everything away from them basically, left them hanging there under the previous DPW director where there was no communication. They took the CPC funding, which I was on, those are my projects, and they took the money without telling us. Oh, and they didn't even tell the Parks and Rec, they were taking the Parks and Rec application money that came to the CPC without notifying us. That turned into a huge brouhaha. This is where we are now.
Right.
There was, our open space plan was filed last in 2007. It expired in 2012. The town hired somebody, Brown Planners, to put a new park and recreation plan together, and that plan, it never got finalized. The people went out of business. And so, still today, it's 2018, we don't have a park and recreation plan. So that means that there's already $13 million in the just last 2 years that could have been money that we could have tapped into for improving our parks. And that goes back to the conversation of who is responsible, who's looking for the money, who's applying for CPC money, or this park money or other grant money to improve our parks.
It was always Parks and Rec up until the DPW took it over and took the money out without telling us.
Yeah. And then all this, you know, even the Park and Rec Commission doesn't even know what parks are really under their purview because, and I'm the chair, and I asked the previous chair, Nash, and he, you know, like, nobody really knew because you ask everybody and every government official that's in the town, and they'll tell you a different, you know, story. But when you go around and look at the signs at the park, it does say it's under Park and Recreation Commission. Tom Nevers, some people say Tom Nevers is not a part. It's really just a confusing, I feel like if there's anything you guys could do to really look into this, to bring it up to date, to bring back our Park and Recreation Commission.
Cheryl, if I may, have you approached the town administration about this?
Yes, I mean, just on a casual basis, I've met with Matt Fee. He recommended I talk to you guys. I met with Jason Bridges several times. Not Parker, I've met with Rita Higgins. Libby knows, through some communications that I'd like to see Park and Recreation Department back. I was at the Board of Selectmen meeting. I did make those comments one day. The commission is about to write a letter to the Board of Selectmen asking to look into bringing this back.
So you've not seen any concrete response?
No, it was administration that removed it.
Well, so yeah, I mean, so it's originally in the charter, is in the charter today. I mean, just like in 3 sentences sort of thing. I mean, what was the impetus for diffusing all of this?
Because our economy, the crash, like they were trying, they were trying to save money and, save wherever they could. But it's a different time now. And besides that, when you tie health and park and activities and connecting people and people are looking for things to do outdoors, after work. I mean, we have the paddle club that's really a great thing, but where they're playing tennis or on these leagues, there's nobody organizing these leagues anymore. Soccer,
And they've got a double booked
softball.
and everything else, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's all I have to say, but.
Okay.
Plus, Parks and Rec made a lot of applications through the CPC, starting back when we started out 15 years ago. The turf field, Tom Nevers Playground, I think the Jetties Playground. I know the Children's Beach Playground came in before us. I know that they've come in for various other things over time, and they stopped coming when their money was taken, and they didn't really exist for all intents and purposes, because they made the applications, but they didn't have control over the funding that they made the application for. We've sort of basically worked out how they have to report, because we have to report to the DOR from the CPC every month on how funds are spent. But we worked very closely with the Parks and Rec for a long time on getting all this stuff done, and then it was taken away from them and sent to the DPW, and they pretty much destroyed the turf field, and they destroyed the natural field, and it just went on from there. And the CPC was very strong in our support for Parks and Rec versus the DPW taking over Parks and Rec's jurisdiction. When we started the Parks and Rec 20-some-odd years ago, might have even been 30 years ago, we started it because things were being addressed. And we had to schedule Wisconsin fields, and we had to schedule some of the other fields. In the Delta field, we were building the Delta field. The Little League was building the Delta fields, and we needed somebody to oversee their upkeep, the concession stand upkeep, the bathrooms at the beaches upkeep, and scheduling, and 4th of July, and everything else. And we needed a separate department because Nantucket was becoming such a destination recreational area, as opposed to just I'm coming spending $1 billion at the White Elephant. So it was started, it went great guns, Megan did a great job, and then it started to go, and then Jimmy was at that job for a long, long time. He had his own maintenance crew. That worked out really well, and they lined the fields and everything else, and very few people had any complaints about the facilities or scheduling. When that went out, when Jimmy retired, things started to go downhill, and we became very concerned about the $2 million we spent on those fields because they weren't being upkept.
Sure.
Yeah, and there's no benefit.
And there was something put on the field that we didn't want to pay for, and we didn't have the money, and they did it anyway and took the money. So a bunch of us have been talking about getting Parks and Rec back for a long, long time, and I'm obviously clearly fully in support of Parks and Rec having their own department again and having their own maintenance staff again and taking over the scheduling and doing what they did so well for 25 years.
I do want to add to that. All these different departments, that the way it's entities where Park and Rec exists now, nobody wants to do anything more. Like, they're all in their, they're overwhelmed with their own positions, and when they acquired these additional responsibilities for Park and Recreation, they're just kind of barely getting by whatever they have to do, and they have they may have interest to make it better, but, you know, they don't have the time or the energy,
Right.
you know? For instance, Amy says that she processes 12,000 licensing things a year, you know, and at one point she said, no more, I'm done. Like, and somebody wants to come do yoga in the park, done, you know, like, she doesn't want to process
Sure.
any more applications.
But then the schedule goes through community school at the moment, and that was as of a couple of years ago.
Well, that's different, that's school scheduling and the tennis courts at Jetties.
No, and the deltas. They were
And the
doing the deltas and
but
our
that's
open
school.
fields.
But, oh, they were doing
Yes, they
Tom
were,
Nevers,
and they
but,
screwed those all up.
yeah. There's also, the town, at the town meeting, there was $150,000 that were reappropriated for, park improvements and for a master plan for Tom Nevers and all our parks. The good thing about that, you know, we'll hopefully get a design, but where is there the commitment from the town to you know, budget for it annually? Because right now, we don't have any budget for our parks.
Well, I think that's, and don't misunderstand me, I'm certainly in favor of what you're proposing. But as a government study committee, and knowing that Park and Rec is still in the charter in some form of designated form, which I haven't looked at yet, I'm wondering how much we can do. I mean, we certainly can advocate for the recreation, the reestablishment of Park and Rec as it was. I just don't know how effective we're going to be in doing that. I think ultimately the responsibility of this lies with town administration and certainly with the Board of Selectmen. Well, I'm sorry, I'm still going to use that term. It just falls, it falls out of my mouth. I don't mean to offend anybody. Again, I have some concerns as to what our responsibilities are here, but I think as an addendum to any recommendation we may make to town administration, I think that certainly could be in the priorities list.
That would be great.
And you could ask again through.
Oh, yeah.
Through various forms to have
Yeah.
it reinserted back into the budget, since that's how they got rid of you. They took the line out of the budget, and I know David can probably speak to that. Or it may have been before David came back, but under the FinCom.
So, I mean, budgeting stuff is not really our purview.
Right.
It's not,
But,
but the whole thing is.
but do you have a question?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I know that the Department of Culture and Tourism just did a study of what activities people would want in the off-season. And there was a lot of outdoor activities, that might be something where you could go to them and find out. Bowling was on top, I
Oh,
was
yeah,
upset.
I was waiting for that little,
Yeah, so I was just something that you might wanna go to Jenna Schulte.
That's a
and
good
talk to her
idea.
About what the people, because a lot of people wanted outdoor fitness activities, and that's something.
I think you should use every firebrand that you've got.
oh,
And I think you've got to be relentless about it.
I have been.
It seems to me that it's the only way that anything gets done around here lately is if the sabers are rattled long enough and loud enough.
So, kind of on that topic, I was just wondering if whether you all have looked at how Park and Recs operates in, like, on the Vineyard or comparable communities, and to the extent that you have a summary of that type of thing, that is helpful in making a case.
We
Yeah,
have
what
all
am-
that, Tucker, from when we started it the first
I'm
time.
just saying, if we can
But-
get it
but
in
now.
a digestible form, it helps us in making a recommendation.
I wanted to, I'm actually going to go to Boston at some point. I want to meet with the head of the Park and Recreation Commission. Also, Greg Timmerman, he worked for the Boston Park and Recreation. I'd like to check in with the Vineyard too and some other towns. So that was definitely in my mind about that.
Great idea, Tucker.
'Cause they
Good.
had
No,
it
it
on
is.
Cape.
I do know that there was $1.8 million budgeted for Park and Recreation. I know that's, you know, but
The last
Nantucket
time.
only had like 40,000 or something for all the parks.
Is that a statewide one or nationwide?
State, I
That's
assume.
state.
I think we should maybe go back and try to figure out where all that stuff is, that we
I
looked at
have-
all the other towns back 30 years ago and started this from scratch. I mean, most of the Cape towns have them.
Okay,
Thank you. Any other questions for Cheryl? Cheryl, thank you very much.
thank you.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Worth, how are you?
Apologies to your committee for being late.
Quite all right. Glass houses, I'm certainly not going to say anything. I was 15 minutes late due to traffic, so.
Cheer up, the chairman hasn't even showed up yet.
You're calm, trust me, you're,
The select people.
that's all right.
Select people.
Select persons that they are. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for
Nice to be
attending.
here.
So, do you want to dive into this, or shall we give a sort of a preamble to what we're looking at?
You certainly could do that, or we can, I suspect you have some areas that you want to talk with me about. I certainly have.
Oh, Ms. Williams?
There was something that we brought up, I forget who brought it up initially, about the town moderator appointing a certain amount to the
Right.
FinCom. I forget exactly how that was couched. And
I
the
don't know if
rest
it was last
being
meeting or 2
appointed by
meetings
the
ago,
select-
yeah.
It's come up a couple of times over the last couple of months about having a little bit more representative, rather than the selectmen, how many are on
Sure.
the board? There are 9 of you guys total?
Yeah,
It'd be like 2 or 3, 1 appointed by the town moderator, which is how they're doing it in other towns. I think vis-à-vis, what's his name?
yeah, I mean, I think,
Michael Galakis?
yeah, the general, my general comment is that it's, I don't know what the percentages are, but there's as many people that do it one way as do it the other. To the extent that that question is getting towards the impartiality of the finance committee, I can't speak for prior finance committees, but I don't think there's anyone on our committee that's particularly reluctant to, take a position that might be different than where the Board of Selectmen are. We intersect with some of you all on other committees. We don't always agree with where the board is, but I think we get to yes in one fashion or another in a way that works, generally works.
No, I'll sort of plead my ignorance on this. I know obviously you have a lot to do during town meeting time for budgets. Do you find yourself busy year-round, or is it more of a crunch come, say, November through April, and then a little bit for specials?
Sure. So the heavy lifting is really done from, November on. We'll do some work depending on how robust the special town meeting warrant is. Hopefully not too robust. It falls a tough time for most people. But so we do, that's when we do most of our heavy lifting. I think, and Rick, you can help me on this, but I know I, by statute, sit on the audit committee with the chair of the select board and one other select board member, so there are 3 of us on the audit committee. We meet a few times, and I think we're going to pick up our pace a little bit, maybe meet quarterly, but that doesn't involve a full committee. We have representation from many members on other committees, either asked by the town manager or just by.
Is that intentionally done so, or does it just happen to be a nice sort of?
No,
convenient-
it's intentional. Yeah, so we have capital committee representation, and those guys they've started their work, and they go pretty strong between now and December.
Mhm.
The contract review committee, which is our social services committee, we have representation. I honestly don't know what their schedule is, but so one of our members sits on that.
I know you're on something else, CPC.
I don't
Is there one on CPC with us?
I don't think we have anybody on CPC. Yeah.
Run into
The Island Home, whatever the new committee is going to look like, is getting reconstituted, so somebody will sit on that. Generally, there are committees where, in capital, depending on how you read the charter, is a creature and actually is a subcommittee of the finance committee, but we split those responsibilities with the select board. The others are committees that might have, with the exception of, I don't think we have anybody on CPC, but I could
Planning
be wrong.
Commission, is that where?
No. Where there's significant amount of money that's going to be spent.
Mhm.
So obviously, capital
Makes
makes
sense.
sense, and things like our Island Home can
On the other hand, isn't it the other part of that, David, where the members of the finance committee cannot sit on some other committees? There's a reference in the bylaw someplace about that. So
It's actually state. as well.
state, anyway, so some of these are, I'm not sure they're in conflict with that, but there might be a
Yeah.
little tension, whether
Yeah.
it's necessary or not, and anyway.
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, we have 3 or 4 members who volunteer and will take on some additional work. The ad hoc budget committee, which probably was meeting a lot more frequently back 10 years ago, is still a standing committee, and Stephen Maury, our vice chair, and I are members of that committee, I think. For historical reasons, or I don't think there's any statutory reason that we're on. So.
Can you explain what's also come up in here from several different people is the audit committee? What were the reasons we were bringing up the audit committee? Because that's come up, and it's came up with Lauren, it's come up through general
Well,
discussion.
I think I raised it maybe initially here, Linda,
Yeah.
because I sat on it when I was on
Yeah.
the board. And occasionally I felt that the audit committee with the 2 members of the board and the chair of the finance committee it risks being too close
Too
to
in
town
some
administration. And I think it would be helpful to have some community members with experience either join them, or in some cases, they actually replace an inside, not inside, but you know, that kind of configuration. So there's a piece of paper floating around with 2 or 3 other towns to give us a feel for the kind of different configurations of audit committees that are in existence around the state.
Do you have a suggestion on that?
You know, my experience, both public and private and not-for-profit, is that it shouldn't, as Rick is alluding to, be a committee that's dominated by, quote, insiders. I don't mean that in a bad way, but, you know, I'm now the chairman of the audit committee. I'm also the chairman of the finance committee, and in most places, that's not acceptable.
Right.
But since I don't control the money of the town, it's, you know, it's certainly passable. You know, the general comment I would make is that the audit committee hasn't really been all that active. Its major role is to receive the findings from the auditor, review the management letter and recommendations before they're made public, have a discussion about what's in the management letter and any deficiencies that might be noted, and then what sort of corrective actions are going to take place. So I'm just concluding my 6th year on the finance committee. When I joined 6 years ago, and Rick, you have a further perspective here, but when I joined 6 years ago, I don't think we had unqualified audits, but we certainly had a lot of findings.
Yeah, we had unqualified. We had
Yeah,
a
I don't-
series of
I don't-
probably about 4 or 5
And no
audits
audits for a while.
that were
Yeah.
atrocious, and the town was woefully deficient in
We
rectifying
got nailed
those.
by the state.
So now we're,
Really bad time.
you know, we have a decent auditing firm, a lot of experience, good sized firm, and well known to the State Department of Revenue. And and Brian and the finance team have done a terrific job. So, you know, we've got a couple of small things, but there's absolutely no qualification on our audit. There's nothing systemic that's being identified. In point of fact, you know, we've gone further, and Brian's gone further, and we've got a set of procedures on financial procedures for the town, which is something that we hadn't had before. Rick sat on the interview committee for Brian's position. We talked with him about developing that kind of stuff. We get awards now every year for the quality of the financial reporting that we make publicly available. So, you know,
That's great.
in the 6 years I've been associated with it, and really, I lay most of the success at Brian's feet for getting us to where we are. So,
Our bond rating's gone up, hasn't it?
pardon me?
Our bond rating's gone up.
It has. We haven't quite got to AAA, but when we go to market, we get AAA rates. So since the joke going around now is that Nantucket's become too expensive and everybody's going to the Hamptons, we'll probably have our bond rating go up yet again.
Wish it were true.
David, another discussion point over the years has been, when you sort of get, the town 25 years ago was 70 million, including everybody, we're 130 or whatever the hell it is. And some kind of an internal audit position that might have a dotted or even a direct line to the audit committee, it seems to me at some point is very helpful here. I think there are a lot of things that are supposed to happen, they don't all happen. And I've always envisioned that job to be like a check and balance
Sure.
on town administration, and find a place that can go direct to the board, or it could go two places.
Yeah.
But have you had any discussions about that and thought about it?
We haven't had formal discussions. As a general comment, so we're, close to a $90 million general fund enterprise now, plus airport and all of that. So, we're a $125 million business, if you will. An internal audit position would, generally would probably be a pretty good discussion point. The challenge that I think we have, particularly in a job like that, is getting somebody or somebodies that are qualified and can work, effectively and do the job and not be unqualified and pushed aside, and then it just becomes a superfluous position. I will say that our auditors are doing more internal audit work, so that's how we've sort of compensated. So they do work at the schools. They're getting into places where there's a lot of cash that's being handled, and which we weren't doing for a while anyway. Yeah. So our auditors are taking on some of those, those additional responsibilities.
But you want to make sure they don't get too close. They shouldn't be ever operating anything, so they should be
Understood.
someone else operating.
I can tell you that we're probably going to go one more year, and then we'll probably go back out and look again at just there's good practice and
Yeah, totally.
at least
But I also meant in the school lunch fund and all, whatever's going on over in the schools, that's important from a cash point of view. But there are, a lot of number of other things that are supposed to happen around the town, whether they have to do with personnel policies or any number of things you can think about that may or may not be happening.
Yeah.
And if they're not happening, no one ever knows about it.
Yep.
And this kind of position, I think, would have a responsibility. They just got a super checklist, and we'll find out. So.
Do you have something else?
No, well,
Please.
David may have some ideas and some thoughts. Do you want to, or do you just want to hear some questions from us?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer the questions. I deal with quite extensively with the town on any number of items.
Well, the general question I think we are asking of everyone is just from your vantage point, are there, suggestions that you would like to see made to the charter or how the town can operate better? It's kind of open-ended.
Sure. Well, let me answer that in a sort of a roundabout way. The town's gotten really big, and it's a complex operation, and there's not enough bandwidth with staff to get the stuff done. So, to some extent, and you can look at this both as a good part about how we do things and a bad part about how we do things. We have a ton of committees. And in many ways, the committees are doing the work that might otherwise be done by staff. And those committees are only as good as the people that are on them and their interest and their knowledge and their understanding. So to some extent, we've outsourced the running of the government to its citizens. Now, said like that, you say, hey, well, that's not a bad thing. But what in many cases, you get people in that are not qualified to be in the positions, and so you don't get good decisions that are being made, and or they're very slow in being made. And I can think of any number of committees that were formed and then just fell apart. They never fulfilled their requirements, perhaps because their requirements given to them or the mission was too broad. They didn't have the right people. So, I think that we've fallen into, instead of, we're looking harder at the quality of the people that work for the town. We end up outsourcing
Right.
a lot of that work.
Do you mind picking up on that? And if we're getting too close,
Yeah.
you can tell us to back off, but I always find an example or two, if they're possible, David, to share with us. Otherwise, we're all going to make our own assumptions about what those examples are.
Well, I'll give you.
And we may not be clear
Right.
in understanding which committees are getting closer to sort of operating activities, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I would say that committees are necessarily getting closer to operating activities, but let's take a committee that I think you were on the board when it was formed. If you remember, a few years ago, we had this, and we're about to do it again, had this committee put together to look at wages and salary bands and where everybody fit. And that had a chairperson, and it went nowhere.
Is this the one that partly came out of the finance committee when
Yeah.
Cliff Williams and the airport were active
It
issues?
probably did. I think Matt might have chaired it as a board of selectmen
Yeah, I
person.
think Matt was interested enough at the board to step
Yeah.
in along with coming on.
Right, and as near as I can tell, it died
Yeah.
a quiet.
Does it still technically exist?
I would have no idea.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's a good example. It never functioned in any way to make any progress, so.
Right, and so you can say, did it not have the right mission? Was it a sort of a knee-jerk reaction
Right.
to a situation that occurred, and somebody said, well, let's do a study, and everybody said, that's fine, because it'll push it off for 6 months. We don't have to worry about it, and then it sort of, it sort of died its, a death. So to me, there's an example of where we outsourced a problem, and maybe we did it to have it die, but anyway, it did.
Yeah, it's okay.
I mean, the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Committee it's an elected committee. It meets, at least meets monthly, and maybe meets every 2 weeks. As near as I can tell, they have virtually no power or authority. I think they're pretty much shunned by the staff these days. And, why
They
does
take
it?
themselves very seriously.
Probably. and I don't want to I don't want to suggest that they're not important, but it seems like, the way they're constituted, that they're not, they want to tackle big problems. I think they probably get caught in the weeds, no pun intended, and they just don't move forward. And so those are the
Is
kinds
this
of,
the Shellfish Advisory Board?
No,
No.
Sharon.
No,
This is a
yeah.
different, this is a committee, okay.
it's an elected,
It's elected.
elected
Yeah,
group.
Peter Brace is the chair, and it's got Blunts on, or whatever that guy's, all that kind of stuff. And 3 or 4 scallopers, and Andy Lowell,
Wendy
I think,
McRae.
signed up now. Good for him,
But I think the output out of that and the meetings and the lack of any kind of progress is, sort of another side of, do you need those kinds of, do you need those kinds of committees in order to be effective in the town? And how much there should, town administration take more responsibility for some of these things versus.
So that was my question, how much does this track back to administration?
I don't think, I wouldn't lay it at the feet of anybody other than the fact that this is the way we've been doing it, and as we've gotten bigger and the problems have gotten bigger, and, there are good citizens like yourselves and myself who want to get involved, and so this is, a good way to make that happen.
So I think.
What's the unintended consequence of doing that?
Right.
Question mark.
Right.
I mean, I think Libby had brought up sort of, I'm gonna say similar, I heard a similar concern of like, please comb through our committee structure and what's working and what isn't working. But I heard you talk about the complex operation and not enough bandwidth with staff, which has kind of been my own internal observation, just, you know, a year involved with the town. But so what would be the recommendation to address that / operate better in this more complex environment that we're in?
Well, I think that, and I want to say, I think that we're actually, certainly at the department head level, making good progress. I think for the first time, the town's probably got all of its major departments staffed with very competent people. They may not be your cup of tea, but stuff is getting done. And for the first time, I think that we've got some pretty good folks. You know, I haven't delved into, you know, the next levels down in their performance-related issues. I'm sure that a lot of stuff doesn't get done because of, you know, that next sort of mid-management level, if you will, doesn't perhaps quite have the skill set and the stuff to make it happen. I think it's absolutely imperative if you want to get good people that we have to pay a competitive market rate and understand that housing is a serious issue for people, which I think we all do. But you know, we can't, if we want the services that we want and for a first-class community that we have become, then we need to go and get the people that can deliver that quality for us.
Big business.
Yeah, I mean,
Complicated.
so, you know, beyond that, I think, you know, just looking at your minutes, you know, people have talked about, as they have for years, I'm sure, the Board of Selectmen not being so involved in the weeds and perhaps getting some of the stuff pushed out, you know, to others or staff it out so that maybe the Selectmen don't have to meet weekly and that they could get more focused on policy and not running the town. But ever since I was young,
Rated current, but you can, in the sense
When we were young, it was
on any
like
beach,
a
which
guy
is
standing on the corner by the hub running the town.
right. So we want to upgrade a little bit for that.
I'll stand in front of the town building now.
I thought we want to go back to that.
Well, that's true.
Do you see a sense in sort of writing in or just having a mandatory special town meeting? You know, would it
Wouldn't even be special to be town
Be-
meeting twice a year.
does that for budgetary finance purposes?
Yeah.
Does that is there a benefit to that? Are you ambivalent to it? Does
I mean, I like probably most everybody don't like a fall town meeting for a variety of reasons. You know, I think it's less representative of, you know, the voting population. Even though, you know, we get a small portion of our voters in the wintertime or the spring. So I guess I wouldn't be in favor of doing that. I think, you know, citizens are more than welcome to, you know, put in articles. I think departments ought to be discouraged from doing that. I mean, there is a control point that the town has in terms of saying, you know, we're going to conduct a major part of the town's business at our annual town meeting, and you know, that's when we're going to do it.
David, and I brought this up at the last meeting, and I'll bring it up again because it's just something that I'm interested in. From your perspective, how do you feel about a separate town meeting for zoning articles?
I wouldn't be in favor of it.
Okay.
What about representative town government as a concept that's been brought up? Any
Or town council or whatever.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, many communities obviously have representative, you know, town government, and it clearly works. You know, Falmouth has representative town government. You know, do you run the same problem of getting, you know, enough people to participate in a,
Yeah.
you know, the only thing that the one thing that I made a suggestion on about town meeting that might help a little bit is, and I think it's within the power of the select board to do this, which is that articles that are called are then dealt with by pulling their number out of a hat, and that they're not dealt with sequentially.
Make it hard to pack the meeting, you know,
Interesting.
it forces people to stick around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, it does.
That's been discussed for a long time, and it never has quite, how about electronic voting, David? You thought about that much at town meeting?
I haven't,
Yeah.
I don't think it's that inefficient. I mean, the reason that town meeting takes so long is we have 110 articles every year, or whatever the number is.
I think more
It
about
was this year.
people free to vote their conscience and not worried about the
Sure.
social implications.
Yeah.
To me, that's an important issue.
Yeah, I mean, those of us that sit down front can see how people
Everything.
vote, but most of the time you're not really that, are you that conscious of how other people are voting?
I think a lot of people are.
Yeah, I think you're
It's
wrong.
interesting.
I think from up above where I am now,
Yeah,
I like to know how everybody down there votes.
yeah.
Because to me, it impacts who you want to vote for the next round.
I didn't mean for the
Board of
people sitting in
Selectmen.
front, but are you?
I mean, both ways. I
Both,
always
yeah.
want to know how Richard votes when
Yeah.
I was down there,
Yeah,
because he can be a real pain, right?
yeah,
And, you know, he,
yeah.
or anybody, I'm sort of kidding.
No, I'm
But
okay
I'm
with
not. I think it can be important.
Yeah.
How
What,
do we-
I don't know what they experience, what other communities are doing. Are other people doing?
I think they're starting very, very
Yeah.
slowly.
Yeah,
But there
it's
are a
very
few,
expensive.
and it's, the technology gets better, and, you know,
I mean, I know I've been in a number of business settings. It's actually very effective when you have senior management and junior management, and you're having a broad discussion. And there's a big power differential, and so the people who don't have the power are much more reluctant to. And so you see, you see little devices and
Yeah, right.
stuff like that.
Clickers,
So,
what have you.
well,
just kind
it
of
could be
there.
like zoning, I mean, a good example of me, excuse me, I'll let you go then, but zoning is a good example. My neighbor puts in an article, they want to rezone 10 lots, and I'm not interested, and, you know, we're head to head.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that can be divisive for a lifetime.
Sure.
So,
I'd like to circle back on the fall one. I've heard a lot of positives about the fall, because what happens in March or April is a lot of the year-round populations, especially the aging baby boomers,
Yeah.
are away during the winter, and they don't get to go to town meeting. And they're here in the fall, probably through Thanksgiving or up till Christmas. So a lot of the people I saw in the fall were people that don't get to come in the spring, and they love to come because they came when they lived here year-round. So we pick up a bunch of people in the fall that don't feel like they have a voice in the spring because they're not here. Not even Jack Gardner's back for town meeting anymore. My in-law's not back.
Yeah.
They all used to come back for town meeting, and they don't anymore. So these guys actually get to go to town meeting in the fall, and I think that's a good idea to have their voices heard.
maybe we ought to flip it, so the annual is in the fall and the special is in the spring.
Yeah, then you
Well,
have
we
a
wouldn't even call
major
them special
budget
anymore.
Well,
problem.
it happens every year, so
But, you
it's
know.
not very special anymore.
So maybe there are a lot of them that have gone to May, because
Well-
late people are back, as opposed to March and the dead of night.
The observation I would make is that we're early in our
Yeah.
town meetings. A lot of the Cape Towns are much later.
Yeah, May, June.
Not much, but
But
certainly.
even May
later.
makes a big difference because everybody's back by then.
Yeah.
And town council seemed
Everybody's
to
working.
indicate as such that that May, mid to late April and May was her busier time with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, more fundamentally, a town meeting form of government versus like a city council, do you see any perspective on that?
I mean, only if you made a wholesale change, and,
Yeah.
Works.
if you had a male, you had a strong you know, we would have what I would call a weak town manager form of government. You know, and that may just be because of the way it's grown up. If you had a strong town manager and a weaker board, maybe you get the same benefits. I don't know. You know, mayoral form of,
Right.
but
Because I know a lot of towns are doing away with their board of selectmen, they're moving over, especially the larger towns, they're moving over to a city council or some other
Right.
form as opposed to our old tried and true.
Yeah.
So all the stuff that we've been talking about, just trying to get a handle on where to go. Suzanne Kennedy came in and said that changing to representative town government was a nightmare. She's worked all over the state, including in New York State. And she's worked with city council. I mean, she says some pretty strong ideas about that stuff. I'd love to have her
not a
back
thing.
again, because she's a font of information.
Right. yeah.
Any other questions for David?
No. You might share your sort of philosophy, if that's the right way to think about it, David, when the Finance Committee gets articles from the town, they're often much more financially oriented than from the planning side of things. Although my sense is the planning side's longer-term impact is more consequential for the community. And the Finance Committee wrote a letter to the board, which died a death of zero response. And you must have felt strongly enough about that to write the letter. And
Sure.
is there any more discussion at your level to try
Yeah,
again?
Yeah.
You know,
Um,
try again, and then you
Yeah,
get
we
someplace.
have long memories. And it's not gonna die.
What?
I heard the other night, actually, from the data platform people, that they actually can tell you on an hour-by-hour basis now the population on the island.
That thing's gonna be so cool for the master plan and everything.
And they can
else.
see it go up and down.
Yeah.
It's also not what's here today, it's where we're going over the
Yeah,
next
well,
5 or 10
one,
years.
one thing that we were interested in, as you know, was
Yeah.
what is the population, so so maybe 50% has been asked, or answered, and I think, I think the NPDEC, is probably on its way. I don't know what the schedule, you probably know better than I, but I think there's a statutory requirement that it be updated, and I think it's gonna be updated.
The master plan?
Master plan,
Yeah.
which will go. I think philosophically, so we've sort of evolved from really not looking at planning articles to looking at ones that we thought had fairly major financial ramifications, if you will, to keeping our position, so we don't want to usurp the role of the planning board, certainly, but what is obvious is that many of these groups have, they sort of have their vertical silos, and there's not a lot of stuff necessarily going horizontally. And the financial ramifications of decisions we're making, and it's not in the planning board's charter to look at that. It's any number of those kinds of situations where nobody's really got the responsibility to take a look, horizontally. And that's sort of we've had that discussion about the need to do that. Now, planning is the obvious place, just because of the growth and the impact that has transpired. So, we, as recently as last year, we made the decision to again, sort of, if it has no significant, in our view, no significant financial impact, we accept the work that the planning board did and aren't going to comment on it. We've certainly got some comments from the community that they would like to see us take a more, have a more involved role. That also means generally a lot more work to go through that, because this is not an easy task without differing viewpoints.
And as you said, without additional support, that you are a committee of volunteers.
Right.
I think what would be a good idea, just having been on it for years, was the FinCom having a little bit more involvement with the see because of infrastructure and
Right.
roads that they're taking on the arteries and roadway improvements and the impact and how it's gonna get paid for, because all those of us sitting on the planning commission don't necessarily know how it's gonna get paid for.
Right.
You know, beyond tip funding for other things or grants from the state, there's a lot of financial involvement, bonding and everything else
Mhm.
with these road improvements. And I think what's been missing from many of the planning commission meetings that I was on was exactly the financial arm of this thing. So I
Well,
think there needs to be more
That's
communication
probably a
with you
good
guys.
suggestion, Linda, which you guys can probably affect, because there is no statutory role for a finance committee member to play on NPDEC. There is a DPW role.
That's gone now, it's up to the state. They're removing it. To
They
get
are.
down to 11. Yeah, I went through town meeting as a home rule.
So we had to go to 11?
Yeah.
Okay.
We got rid of it to go back to 11, DPW as an adjunct, but not a
Yeah.
voting member.
So, anyway, that may make some sense. Maybe it should drop a planning board member and put a finance committee member if you need, because I
That's-
guess,
You can't drop a planning board member, that's statutorily required, but I think you guys should be somewhere involved with the
Yeah.
planning commission, because it's got the economic bracket part of this.
right. So that would be probably a good,
Yeah.
however it gets structured would probably be beneficial,
Yeah.
so that, that conversation is represented.
I'm surprised you aren't represented on the planning commission.
So,
Any other questions?
No, I'm good.
David? Greg, any parting words, sir?
Thank you for
No?
coming.
Thank you.
There's
Really,
a-
thank you
there's
for
a
all your
lot-
time.
There's a lot going on. It's very busy and getting very complex. And I don't think, I can tell you our second home owner population doesn't understand the complexity.
No.
You
There
know,
needs to be more involvement with those guys, too.
I get invited to speak at any number of those things, and they're just very, very smart people that are relatively clueless.
Yeah.
Now, maybe they want to be, they
Yeah.
like their tax rate and the way it
that
is,
might
and they
be.
got a great view of the ocean and
Right.
How do you pay for it?
come in and get out. Although, the number of people who called about Mr. Diplo's article was,
Oh, my God. I got called from
I never
one of my old
heard,
friends.
well, I got called from people I didn't even, never even
Well,
heard
I
of.
sent one to you, and she did speak to you.
Anyway.
Thank you for coming today, and thank you
Yeah.
for all the time that you devote. I mean, it's an extraordinary amount of time.
Quite
It's
right.
certainly
Thank
got-
you.
It's gotten more complex for you over the last 6 years. It's not what it was 6 years ago.
No, but I'd like to, that's right, and I will, put a plug into for the current FinCom. We've actually got a pretty highly functioning group of people, which has been a while coming.
Good.
And people that, have good financial backgrounds. Nobody's got an axe to grind on anything. I mean, I think we take our nonpartisan, small p role, appropriately. And so there's a good group, and it's, and it really coincides with the work that, I can't stress enough how much Brian has helped this community get to where it is. So.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, sir. Very good.
Jason is not coming. He was on a bike tour. They had a flat tire. It was
Oh.
an Adams camp.
Yeah.
Disabled kids camp, and he got stuck at it Surfside. He said he's not going in and coming back, so.
He can have his own meeting.
Man, that sounds like an excellent idea to me. Um, We don't as of yet. I think we can start talking about that under other business.
I missed that, talking about what?
About scheduling a next meeting, and sort of, if we want to, at that next meeting, maybe we start to plan our next few meetings and sort of a blueprint for any public hearings. I will say the one thing that's been very interesting to me thus far is that, not without getting too much into it, I could potentially see us making recommendations to the boards or various commissions that are not necessarily charter changes. just say, look, this is what we've heard from public, et cetera. Parks and Rec, for instance. I don't know that that can go in as a charter change necessarily, but certainly we can say to the select board, hey, guys, this makes a lot of sense. We've
You know,
heard
just a comment on
etc.
that, John, to follow up. I think again, paragraph 4 was section 4 in here that talks about departments and so forth. You know, one option was what we talked about a little bit last time, was to sort of free it up so it doesn't have a lot of specificity. I think Park and Rec would find that disappointing because it's going the other direction and you give the town manager and the board enough leeway and who knows what they'll do. If we think there ought to be a tighter rein, let's pick on Park and Rec, but there are
Sure.
lots of other examples, you could structure that section to continue certain relationships in a required way and make it clear, maybe even clearer than it is now, but I think it has to be clearer than it is, where the responsibility lies. So
Sure.
we ought to think some more about that.
No, I
But
think that's right.
understand, the reason why the only thing they could do was defund it
Yep.
is because they cannot get rid of it out of the charter. It's under some sort of a state thing.
Well, I know there's a state thing about a Park and Rec commission, Linda, but
Yeah.
that's different from what's in our charter. You don't, it would be, I haven't read the Park and Commission state enabling legislation. We should get a copy of that. But usually that legislation would not go on to say, you know, in paragraph 6, that the town charter must make reference to Park and Rec. That's very unlikely. I think it's in here because that's where it was historically when we adopted the town charter. So,
But keep in mind, they tried to get rid of the Parks and Rec completely. And they couldn't because of a state restriction. I don't remember what exactly that was, and it's been several years now. But that's why the only thing they could do was defund it. They could not take the people off. They couldn't get rid of it.
You mean take the people off the commission?
Yeah, they had to have a commission,
I think that
and
again
they
is
can't get
because-
rid of it.
So,
Yep.
you know, we have asked the town manager at a prior meeting for a couple of things that we haven't seen. One was a list of committees to get at some of these questions.
Quite
And
right.
it was to be broken down between statutory committees, such as the Finance Committee and others, or Park and Rec coming from the state, and select board chartered committees that are entirely within their purview.
Right.
So David talks about the personnel, which
Right.
I hear it. The Board of Selectmen, it's poof, it's gone. It's up to them
Mhm.
from their management perspective. So we don't have that.
Lauren's review.
I reached out to Lauren again. She sent me an apologetic note and mentioned that her mother recently passed away. So, yeah.
So many of us have lost.
It's
It was just
brutal.
awful
I
this
know.
winter. It was
It's-
terrible.
So I'm giving
I
her
think we also
plenty
asked
of
about
leeway.
the organization chart, because the organization chart, if you look at the one submitted, I think it's helpful to us, and you can tell with the Park and Rec
Mhm.
discussion, to have names on there, so that I think we relate a little bit to the structure, including the responsibility, because people are responsible, not boxes.
Mhm.
And some of the boxes on there are not staffed, so they don't make sense, at least to me. So in the public safety section of that org chart, there's sort of public safety, and then there's police and fire. I'm not aware that anybody fills that as a public safety
Mhm.
chair.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Or
Yep.
staff members. So I think it would be helpful to get that.
Okay.
I don't know how the rest of you feel, but otherwise you're sort of little C.
I think it's worth asking, and we'll see what they come back with. So that, you know,
When dates.
as I say, so that should get us. So we should try to schedule something with Jason again, and
He gets really busy during the summer because of the bike tours.
We're all busy during the summer. You can break away.
so
That's
I
his
would.
job. That's his job.
Yeah, yeah.
So I would suggest we,
9 in the morning instead of 1:30 in the middle of the day.
That would actually be easier.
I can't do 9 in the morning on some days
Well,
at all.
change the time.
Well, yeah, if that's the issue, Chris, I wouldn't mind if that's the issue. It may not be
yeah,
the issue.
I'll tell you what, I'll email Jason and I'll say basically what can you do? We'll try to shoot for something next week pending availability.
No, you're not doing it
That's
next
fine.
week.
Oh, you're right, we're not doing it next week. Darn right, we're not doing it next week. Never mind. I still think we're in May. I'm sorry.
I'm still looking for the last one. You're right.
Thanks. Okay, so we can try to shoot for the week after that,
That would be the 9th.
some week then, and I will email Jason as soon as I get back to the office and check on his availability.
You know, going back to commissions and their charters, I think because this gets at the Park and Rec discussion today, if we don't have their charter, it's not in here. I think a lot of the stuff Cheryl thinks is in here,
Is it?
ain't in here, and so she's got
There's
to,
not a lot in the charter, but it is in the charter, but the details of it were administratively.
Mhm.
we need to, what's in her charter. Otherwise, she's making reference to something that doesn't
The enablement.
rhyme.
I'll see, I'll ask town administration too if they have anything. Yeah,
It's 30-some years old.
they can go up in the attic. Okay, so maybe, so we can try to have Jason the week after July 4th. And it would be great if we could maybe that time circle back and start narrowing down our topics as well.
Yeah, I mean, if we could request now those items
Yep.
that we just talked about, so that gives a couple of weeks for
Yep.
folks to pull them together. That
Yep.
would be great.
Okay, so I will send us, I'll send us all a date and time of the next meeting, but assume that it will be the week after July 4th, and we'll,
I can't do it past Wednesday,
okay.
because I run the house for the
We'll
comedy
try-
festival. and
We'll try to do it early and make it
Yeah.
relatively painless.
Since they're not available that Monday.
Okay, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out.
Wednesday. We're gonna do a morning one.
Okay. May I have unless there's any other business, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Adjourn at 2:44.
Second.
Moved.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you all very much.
Which hasn't really quite figured out what
He said, what we have is
I asked our friend meeting minutes from November 13th.
Wow.
I can.
Awesome.
writing your fight today.
No, no. I checked the weather today.
maybe 5% of what we're talking about.
I'm excited they're using data platform data.
Yes.
That was, I was actually the one that did the hour by hour analysis. So when he said, I was like, yay.
They keep me in the doubt. I'd say like you wouldn't believe what you probably do believe.
Oh, yeah, I don't work for them anymore.
They haven't said a thing to me.
But I think it's a lot.
The agenda is they're making or announcing
Yeah.
appointments tomorrow.
Okay.
You know, I want to go to the meeting, I sent my resume in, and the thing is,
I got a lot of
if
pushback on social
I know.
media
Well,
for the chamber.
I know.
she's a default.
I'm assuming we're shooting.
Yeah, we had to like.
Well, I withdrew in favor of Patty for courtesy. I'm still trying to keep younger people in. But I'm not trying to make a shoe-in, I'm just saying there's a condition, Catherine Stover being in the hospital.
It's just you and Catherine
That's
still.
exactly.
Well, that's why I said, you get over it.
Well, yeah. Okay, well,
It doesn't sound good.
no.
I haven't heard anything recently.
I,
Last thing I heard was she was been unconscious for several days.
well, yeah, and we just had that with Barbara Anderson, who, from our church, who was going home from the wine festival, passed out, brain dead in her car. They choppered her to the Cape and held her for 3 days, then took her to MGH, and the family was here. I did the funeral. The family was held off for 10 days, and they had to decide whether or not to pull the plug. And she died the day they were going to pull the plug. But I mean, she was brain dead. And, you know, Catherine, my God, I've been so close to her for so long, and all of a sudden, bang, but, you know, life is not forgiving.
I was going to say,